Okay, we're going to get started. This is our panel on the future of technology and what it means for software development. Panels are something we've kind of just started doing at these conferences, and I think they're really interesting. So I'm going to have each panelist introduce themselves. So introduce yourself, tell us who you work for, and what you're doing in software development. Not necessarily with Xojo, but just software development in general. Start here with Tim.
Hi, my name is Tim Dietrich. I am an independent developer. I am doing a lot of work right now in the NetSuite space using something called SuiteScript, which is a nasty JavaScript API, and doing a lot with Xojo as well to kind of do integrations with NetSuite.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Reinhard Blumauer. I'm CTO of IP&E marketing company. We do events and all sorts of stuff. I'm in the development business probably most of my life, since I'm 12 years or something. And I'm busy with Xojo and for about 2 decades. And I'm now into hardware and microcontrollers. And this is definitely the future. And I love it. And that's for the moment.
Okay.
Hi, my name is Phil. I work at a company called Lightspeed. We make point-of-sale software. Been in software development for over 20 years. Lightspeed has just gone public about 2 months ago, and we have achieved the rare status of a Canadian unicorn. So we're over 1 billion valuation, which is kind of great. But for Xojo, we use Xojo as a core part of our point-of-sale software. We have multiple point-of-sale software, but one of them that founded the company has Xojo as its core, and it's extremely important to that bit of software that the code that runs in Xojo runs smoothly and in 64 bits, if I might add.
Great.
My name is Paul. I've been a Xojo user since 1999, I think, since the beginning. I make website building software with Xojo, and that's my main programming environment. The software is called EverWeb, and it's just like a easy-to-use website builder.
Okay. So I didn't give these guys any prep at all for what questions I was going to ask. Because I wanted to hear their off-the-cuff sort of reactions to these questions. I didn't want any prepared statements, not the sequel kind, but you know what I mean. Anyway, all right. So the first question is about platforms, and I've got a little introduction here. Actually, I got to take these off. Okay. Over the years, there have been many new platforms that have come along. I don't just mean operating systems, but new devices. When the web came along, the media said everything would be a web application. Next, it was all about thin clients. Now they talk about smartphones. Given the poor track record for predicting such things, what do you think the platform landscape will look like over the next 10 to 20 years? Tim?
10 or 20? How about 10 or 20 months? I mean, I don't know. It seems to me like with every new platform or target that comes out, it's not like there's some other one that drops off. It's just more for us to do, which is one of the reasons why I think Xojo is so popular. We can develop code for everything that's out there now, with Android soon. And who knows what's next? I'm sure you guys will address that.
Anyone jump in? I don't want it to necessarily be...
I guess I should at the moment. I think everybody of us knows Industrial 4.0 and 5.0 is coming up. And one of those new technologies they're coming on is microcontrollers, just for one simple reason, is because you find them all over the place. Sometimes you don't see them, and if you see them, then you love them. And this is definitely one of the future. So Terminator is waiting for us. It's a little scary time, especially if those computers talk to each other or the microcontrollers talk to each other. Artificial intelligence, definitely. I mean, I cannot predict 20 years. I think it will top it up multifold. But I definitely think microcontroller is going to take the road, and the industrial is going to implement it, and you folks should be part of it.
Yeah, I have to agree with Tim that in my experience, it's been new platforms come along, and the media, we want a simple explanation. We want things to be simple, so we want a new platform to come along and just dominate everything, make things simple, but it never seems to work out that way. It always seems like we just have more and more ways to get at information, and that's great, but it does mean more platforms, not less. What about you guys down there, Philippe? And
the platforms do come and go, as you've noticed, and But what happened about 10, 12 years ago with the introduction of smartphones is the data that we generate, we started generating a lot more data, and we all have data about ourselves, whether it's the regular social media data. But I spoke to the CEO of a small startup that does called dothealth.ca, and it's about aggregating all your medical data on your phone. So that you can have your access to your own personal data. Instead of going to all the hospitals and everything, it just makes everything go to your phone. So you can go from one doctor, one specialist to the other, and they don't have to talk to each other through arcane channels. You can just show them on your phone. So it's about the data that you own and that you generate and that's personal being close to you. Now, whether that's on a phone, on a watch, on an eyepiece, on a whatever piece of technology that's close to you, I think the future is better control and of intimate and personal data.
Okay.
Well, I think with every new device, there's definitely new opportunities, but for my case in particular, I was always worried that people would stop. They said people would start using tablets instead of desktop computers, so I was like, oh, I got to make my software onto tablets, but that really never ended up happening, and perhaps actually using the computer with the keyboard and the mouse just makes us most productive, and that's why people get those little keyboards for their tablets so that they could type and do things a lot better. So maybe using an actual laptop is just the easiest way to be as productive as we can, but these other devices do offer new opportunities.
Okay. So let me go on to another question. So what software-driven technology that exists today surprises you the most?
So what surprises you the most then? So we can get started.
I ask the questions, you answer them.
I don't think it's so much about something that exists that surprises me that it exists. It's just how quickly they're becoming reality and how quickly they're maturing. Artificial intelligence, machine learning, those are two obvious ones, I was talking with someone earlier today, and I mentioned the show Person of Interest, which was not that long ago that was a show that was on TV, and I used to think was somewhat far-fetched. But now looking back at it, just a few years later, everything that was in there, facial recognition, being able to scan a crowd and see who those people are. I mean, it's the speed with which things are changing, I think, that surprises me the most.
Yeah, I saw an episode of 60 Minutes a while back where they were talking about artificial intelligence, and they were showing companies in China, and they've got cameras pointed at a street, and people are just walking down the street, and the software was extraordinarily accurate at being able to say that's a male between 50 and 55, about 6 feet tall. The software could look at a video of someone just walking by and seeing them from a distance, not up close, and get an extraordinarily accurate amount of data. That was surprising.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And in the early days, just a few years ago, we needed a whole many machines in order to just recognize all that. Now it's just in a microcontroller. I mean, this is just amazing, and I know exactly what you're talking about, Geoff.
Yeah.
And this is just exactly that's where it's going at. And it's not only face recognition; it's also artificial intelligence. It doesn't require anymore a lot of back computing and high tech. It's coming smaller, faster, and more intelligent.
Yeah, if you look at, for example, the Photos app on iOS, and you can go to the search field and type in cat, and bang, every picture you've got of a cat or someone who looks like a cat shows up. But and I show that to someone like my mom or my daughter, and they're like, "Oh, that's really neat." I'm like, really neat. You have no idea what had to happen for that to work like that. I mean, yeah. So it's.
Can I interject something? I'm sorry to interrupt, but my session on Friday morning is going to show.
Oh yeah. Jim is going to be doing this. What's the title of your session, Jim?
Integrating your Xojo app with artificial intelligence services.
Okay, integrating your Xojo app with artificial intelligence services. I was talking to Jim yesterday about his session, and it's a really interesting one. So that's a machine learning session. Definitely want to go to that one, which is part of what we're talking about.
I think that what surprises me the most is I was a statistics teacher in the past life, and that when we talk to some person, it's artificial intelligence, and then it's machine learning, and then at the end, it's just statistics. So the math has been there all along. We're just applying it in different ways. So what's going to surprise me the most is how the heck do we debug these things? Because if they're learning, if there's a learning algorithm to learn, is this a muffin or a pup or a puppy? You've seen those pictures, right? Cat or whatever. So how do we debug when the algorithm goes wrong and classifies something as a muffin instead of there's no way to debug it right now. It's more like, we'll train the model more. So
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. When it's looked at a million images to figure that out, it's pretty hard to redirect it.
Exactly.
Well, what surprised me actually was coming here. I went through the global entry at the airport, and you don't even need to put your passport into the machine anymore. They just take a photo of you, and they have all your information, your passport number, your flight number, and everything. And that's completely new because when I left, a couple months ago, it wasn't like that. And so now I just looked at it, and they printed out a ticket, and I was so surprised that I didn't put my passport in there. So that was very surprising to me.
Okay. So here's another one. So when I was first writing custom software a long time ago, my dad, who had spent his adult life as an engineer working on military applications, said that a good programmer, I'm not kidding, he said this, a good programmer can write 10 solid lines of code a day. And I told him that if that's all I could do, I couldn't stay in business. Clearly things have changed since my dad was an engineer. Today it feels like we can write code faster than ever before, but I'm wondering if we've hit a bit of a wall. How do you guys feel about that? Is it still going faster and faster?
I'm going to say a good programmer or a good lead developer actually deletes more code than they write. So
Actually, I agree with you, yeah. But I believe coding is just going in a higher level. So if you call the lines which actually produced going to the machine, then you probably, it's going to be miles and miles of books. But as higher the language gets, you try to get quicker, faster, and more efficient to your goal. What's behind it is none of your business no more. Somebody else took care of it. And if Xojo, what we have is a higher level language, and there are more to come, and especially more going into hardware-specific things.
It's interesting you say that because when the Macintosh first came out in 1984, there was a debate about whether or not the applications you wrote were even applications, because you were relying so much on the operating system more than any platform had ever before.
Yeah.
It was like, well, those are really like subroutine. Your app is really just a subroutine of the OS. It's not really an application at all.
I think there's a line in the Tag Nazini book about Tag on interface that when you write in, like, at the time it was like DOS and everything, and then you're writing on essentially level 3 of your building, right? Mm-hmm. So you've got a basement and things like that you can build on, but you're starting building on level 3. And when you use these high-level frameworks, and Coco is one of them, and Xojo is one of them, you start basically on the 27th floor because everything else below you is built already. So that's very powerful. But I will counter that by saying, augment that by saying that the code that you don't write has no bugs. So if you don't write that code, of course you rely on somebody else's code, but you're assuming that the people that are writing this code are testing it in much more varied situations than yours, and it's probably much more solid than what you would have come up with in even weeks of working on it.
Yeah, we've. I don't have any statistics on this, but we frequently get bug reports in feedback, and we ultimately determine that the bug is actually in the OS and not in feedback at all, or in Xojo at all. And we have to unfortunately go back to the user and say, this is not a bug in Xojo. But so that's the downside of the upside is that you're on top of the stack of other people's work, but the downside is you're on top of the stack of other people's work. So
a very simple sort function. Everybody in this room can probably write a sort function. How many of you do, right? You probably rely on the OS or the Xojo sort function, right?
Right.
Why not? It's there,
Right. You got anything, Paul?
Well, in terms of like programming and where it's going, I think because there's so much memory and you can write very inefficient code now and get away with it. So you kind of fall into this trap of not optimizing your code as much as it should be and just relying on all the memory and processor speed of these really fast computers and really advanced computers. So
Yeah, and when it comes to that, a programmer once told me, and I like this idea, because it's easy, I agree you should optimize, but it's also easy to get wrapped around the axle on optimizations and never actually ship. So what he said was, you write the initial version of the code the fastest way you can that'll make it just work. And once you've got it actually working, the next step is to start optimizing. And you absolutely should, because you're right, because you can get into relying on the machine when you could have actually made it a whole lot better.
Yeah, well, before you get to that next step, you're already working on the next feature, right? Because you got to get those more.
That's right,
So
that's right.
You fall into that trap, I think.
That's right. Okay, let me go to the next one here. What could have come along that would help us, or what could come along that would help us see another huge leap in the speed of software development? What's going to give us the next big productivity boost?
I think we just need to get back to simplicity. You know, I'd like to answer your previous question. I think, yeah, the way we develop software has clearly changed. It's much more modular, and we rely on APIs and other technologies. I mean, I think we end up, it's easy to over-engineer and prematurely optimize things and think about scale. But we're at a point now where bandwidth is just insane, memory's insane, storage is insane. I mean, 20 years ago, if you told me that we'd have this ability to move this much data around or even just store it, I would have thought, you're crazy. But here we are, right? But think about how we use it. I think we take it for granted. We don't use it in wise ways. So I think, as the technology matures, we seem to find better ways to just not use it optimally. So I feel like a pessimist saying that, but that's what I'm seeing.
I think my answer to your question is serverless microservices. So the cloud is obviously the future. You want to have a computer in the cloud. But if you keep running an instance 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days, first of all, you have uptime problems. And security patches only being applied and stuff like that. Also, you're just running for nothing most of the time. But if it's serverless, I mean, there's still a server, but it's essentially just a function that you call that will answer only when it's called, as opposed to running all the time waiting for something to call it. First of all, it saves a lot of money. And second of all, you can have a lot of them because they can be distributed. They can be over different places. And serverless is the next thing for moving forward.
Actually, that brings up an interesting point. With bandwidth getting faster and faster and more, right now we're writing software on this stack, and there's a finite number of people that were involved and a finite number of functions in that stack. You got the operating system, you have frameworks, etc. But with the web, I shouldn't say the web, with the internet getting so fast and so many people having broadband, it kind of makes me wonder if we're going to see renaissance is the wrong word, but a sort of burst of sharing of functionality through web services. There are web services out there, but imagine if all the code you write, all the methods you write could automatically be web services, and other people out there, they wouldn't have to go download a library, or they could just find them and, this guy's already written this web service that does this kind of calculation. I don't need to write that. I'll just call that web service.
Yeah, it's like we're trying to move back towards web objects in a way. It's like simpler times that, we were right there, and somehow we just missed it. We missed the opportunity.
Well, sometimes the technology comes along and is a little too early, right? And sometimes that person that creates that technology sticks with it long enough, or they're able to stick with it long enough to see it come to its fruition. But other times, someone else has to come along and build on what they've done, and they get all the fortune and success because they were in the right place at the right time.
Maybe I'm going a little leap too far on this, but I always had a dream writing programs, the right programs, and eventually I believe keyboard, especially me, I'm not professional with all these 10 fingers. I believe it would be easier for me just looking in my code and talking to my machine, that's what I want, and you just write it for me. And actually getting it done and most likely bug-free.
Yeah, I could see a day coming at some point where you could describe the logic, and the machine would then just write the code based on your
Exactly,
description
and just
of
give
the
you
logic.
the vision across, more or less, and the code maybe asks you, hey, do you mean that, or do you mean that? And you say, no, none of those, but that.
Right.
And eventually I get that. That would be pretty cool. And I can see that happen, especially with voice recognition and all this kind of stuff. Okay, it takes a lot of servers and a lot of intelligence at the moment, but eventually it shrinks, like the history has proven us.
I believe it's Douglas Adams that said, any technology that's invented before you're 10 years old is normal and it's part of life. Any technology invented between your age of 10 and 35 is pretty good, and you probably can make a career in it. And any technology that's invented after you're 35 is an abomination and should be destroyed.
That sounds like Douglas Adams. Interesting.
I don't have that much to add. I just think that more people being exposed to technology at a young age, like Phil was saying, and just more higher level languages that give people the opportunity to learn how to program without that much of an investment will probably obviously further app development and coding.
You know, it is, there's technology that we live with day in and day out, and we rely on it, and it's easy to take it for granted. And every once in a while, I'm reminded of how amazing the times are that we live in. I was in the kitchen discussing with my wife something that a user had told me about in Sweden. He was talking about a sign. He was an American living in Sweden. And he was talking about the sign out in front of his house, street sign. And I didn't realize that my daughter was sitting at the bar listening to the conversation because she was on her phone. I didn't think she was listening. And all of a sudden, she just flips her phone around and shows me a picture of that sign. And I said to my daughter, you just have no idea the power that you've got in your hands. I mean, when I was her age, if I had been interested in what that signpost looked like in Sweden, it would have meant a trip to the library and searching through books to find it. And there's no way it would have been interesting enough to go to that effort. So I would have just never known. And in 2 seconds, she just flipped around and showed me. She's got, nearly all of the information, we have at her fingertips, which is just amazing. Okay, let's move on. Web apps have made continuous integration a reality. Is this something you use in your software development, continuous integration?
Well, I have a session on that.
Okay.
It's about building with Xojo, but yes, I think it's something that's extremely important. But more than continuous integration, it's continuous release as well. So you want to be able to a release. In that philosophy, a release should be a non-event almost, right? It shouldn't be a stress. I saw a talk by Rich Siegel of BB and Bare Bones Software. He was talking about releasing his software. It's packaged software. It's a text editor, and then every release, there's this moment where it's like the space shuttle. You get to what's called max Q. It's the maximum atmospheric pressure compared to that thing's ever going to get. Because at some point there's less atmosphere because it's going up. Mm-hmm. But there's that pressure that the shuttle has to resist when it's building. And that's intense. And being at that time is when he was also deploying to the App Store. So you're all this pressure, and you also have to deal with Apple. It's like, all these problems. So if you make these releases a non-event using CI and CD, then it becomes much more zen for your development.
For me, I don't really do that. I only continuously release because I always find a last-minute bug or a user finds a last-minute bug. So that's my continuous releasing. Releasing for me is always stressful. You never know what you're going to find, and continuously releasing would seem like it would be stressful too, because there's always be bugs and everybody would start complaining right away. So it's just not something that I have a lot of experience with.
But you can, it's easy to do it with the web because it's just kind of built in, but you can do that with desktop software. Consider Chrome. Does anyone know what version of Chrome they're running? Really? Because it's just constantly kind of updating itself. Yeah. So if you can make a desktop app that can auto-update, then you can get that, right?
Yeah.
It's as you said, it's different because there's something there is something as release fatigue, right? People that go to their apps, and there was a senator that said, "Can you make all these red dots go away to to Tim Cook, right, of all these updates, and they turned on the auto updates essentially. So he just updates all the time. The Facebook app is 200 megabytes. So they release every 2 weeks. So that's 200 megabytes downloaded by half the planet all the time. How is that not a problem in some degree, right?
And all the rest of the data on your smartphone.
Pretty much. But
that was a Facebook joke.
Yeah. I was just using that example, but there are a lot of companies want to move to that kind of a release train model where you just release all the time, right? So it is possible. But on the web, people are always running the latest by definition. So that's why it's different.
Yeah, I think if we're going to get to the point where it's working that way, especially with large applications, the app stores are going to have to take a different approach. They're going to have to do a sort of diff on your app and only download, the differences. I know I was just talking at lunch about how games tend to, like my son's into gaming, and the games are very, very large, and they get updated very, very often. And so what they do is the game is broken down into a whole lot of individual files so that the game company can only upload what has changed. And I think the app stores will have to eventually get to that level of optimization.
When I was in games, we talked to the people of Steam, and Steam has the same amount of bandwidth as Italy.
Wow.
That was in 2012, so it's probably worse now.
Wow. Okay. All right, next question. We're seeing more and more artificial intelligent applications. A simple example, we talked about the search feature in Apple's Photos app. Do you see AI becoming increasingly common, or will it continue to be more of a niche case feature?
I think it's becoming more common already, and we don't realize it. Like, for example, I had a client come to me, it was probably a month ago, and they wanted to be able to translate text from English to multiple other languages. It's product information. But it's, if you just do that sort of the way that we would normally think of doing a translation where it's word for word, it never really works out. You lose the context. So I'm actually using one of Amazon's services to do that translation, and it's almost perfect. I mean, you can tell because you can translate from English to some other language and then to another language and back. And so, yeah, I mean, I think it's already there. I think people are already using it. I know I am.
Yeah, I think Google Translate early on was word for word. It was good at translating from a foreign language into English, but not from English back into foreign language. I did a test where I took an English paragraph, translated it into Japanese, and then I sent it to a friend who's Japanese and asked him what it said. And he said it was illegible nonsense, basically. But when he sent me something in Japanese, it translated pretty well. But I've noticed Facebook has, a little translate button, right? So if you have a friend who doesn't speak your language, and that's pretty darn good these days.
Yeah, and it's very inexpensive. There's no real investment on your part. So, yeah.
And this gets back to what we said before about web services, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe artificial intelligence is one of those things that will just create more and more web services.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I have also a practical example with Google. My wife is from South Africa, and she speaks English. I speak native German. And we had it the other way around from English into German. And it is surprisingly real good. It's real good. And maybe with Japanese and Korean or some Chinese languages, it may be a little difficult. But yes, it's getting there. And we also have to understand between artificial intelligence and artificial intelligence. I mean, we had stereophony and quadrophony and what's in between. So a good search algorithm can give you a good feeling as it would be artificial intelligence, which actually is not. It's just damn good programming. And so we have to be a little careful using that word. But basically, it sounds good, AI, and from my point of view, it's definitely the future, and it's already around here, and it's going to be a lot more powerful as it is right now.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything you said. I think that people use it too liberally, like they just say this is AI when it really isn't. And yeah, I don't know where it will go or how quickly it will advance, but it will definitely become a big part of software development and technology?
I think, as Tim said, it's already here. I mean, the AI and machine learning and all of that, they're already. You just had a thing with the facial recognition at the airport, right? It's already here. The problem that I want to caution people about is that these are using training data sets, right? So we train with images or with whatever data that we have. Sometimes it's actually depth data and things like that. And these training data sets have biases because they are built in. And some people say, oh, no, it's a training data. Of course it has no bias, but it does. It has huge biases and will misclassify things like this woman was classified as a gorilla and things like that in some of these image recognition algorithms. That's terrible, right? So we have to realize that these training sets have biases and can be made to generate things that we never expect that would be to any normal human, it would be highly offensive.
Yeah, or worse, it could be purposely manipulated for someone's agenda. It appears to be, objective. It's supposed to be just a program, right? But it's actually,
Yeah, I agree. The program itself has no feelings, but the data that you feed it has it. There was a chatbot that was hijacked by 4chan. And it became a racist chatbot in like an hour or something like that. So it was really trying.
I think that was actually a Microsoft chat thing, and they had to shut it down quickly because it started saying really offensive, racist things.
Exactly. So because it was trying to learn from its environment.
Right. And somebody figured that out and started just feeding it the wrong data.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's my caution there, is that the technology is here, but it's not fully. It depends on the training data. So we have to be really mindful about what kind of training data we feed it.
Yeah, agreed. Okay.
We have a question, apparently.
Let's see. Okay. All right. This actually came up at.
Geoff, you had a question?
A question, yeah.
It seems that I've had this discussion with some other people in regard to Facebook, for example. It seems that bad people will take advantage of whatever technology is out there, and they're very good at it. And part of the problem is that the technology is enabling bad people who used to be fairly isolated from each other, because most people aren't bad, are now able to get together and influence each other, encourage each other to do things that you really don't want them to do, like shoot people. And I'm wondering if maybe we shouldn't do this stuff.
Can you repeat the question?
Well, okay, so I'll summarize. Technology can be used for bad as well as good. Maybe we shouldn't be doing it at all.
That's a bit brutal, but that works.
Yeah. What I would say for me, I'll let the others answer too, is since the history of mankind, over the entire history of mankind, there have been technologies that have been used for good and bad. Somebody invented a shovel to make it easier to dig holes in the ground, and someone else realized that it was a great weapon, right? So that's always been true. It's true now, but it's always been true. So I think we just have to recognize that it's not the tool, it's the person. And maybe what we need to do is be a lot more cognizant as a race, as a human race, of mental health. Because we don't really pay much attention to mental health at all. We just let people go along, and maybe they've got mental problems that are getting worse and worse and worse, and we just, until it's really bad, we don't do anything about it. And yet, everybody, tries to exercise and eat right and all that. We worry about our physical health, but not our mental health. And I think that's the real source of the bad behavior. The technology is just the shovel.
Yeah, I think evolution has been since we're here, and evolution told us keep on rocking, go on, go on, go on. And you may hit your target or you may hit your problem or whatever, but you will solve it and you will continue because someone else will do it. And like Geoff said, there are good and bad things. And we know the atomic weapons and all this kind of stuff can be done for good and for bad. I think eventually, the scary part from my point of view is if machines go out of control, and then it's going to be tough to just break that down again. Then it's not there, but it will be there in 5.0. So we as a programmer, we should be somewhat responsible. We should have a responsibility how we go along with artificial intelligence, how intelligent do we make our machines, or at the moment, you know, like I do, microcontrollers. And eventually when you start talking to each other, you're out there. They have their own protocol, they have their own thinking, and there's no way of you debugging it. So yeah, I hope that answers your questions to a portion. But yeah, we have a responsibility, all of us, and we will be in the center of the fold.
So I was speaking with Kate O'Neill. She's a technology expert and advisor to Fortune 500 companies about this very problem. And what we ended up saying, thinking is, it's not. We have to move away from the move fast and break things approach. How many of you have heard the aphorism? It's better to beg for forgiveness than ask for permission. So you just do the thing first and then the consequences, right? So we idolize this model from Silicon Valley, and as you point out, this really creates the problem of this technology is worldwide. I mean, a shovel, you can hit the people next to you, but you can't really go across a whole continent with it in a fraction of a second, or make people that would otherwise not connect themselves together. So as a Canadian, I have to point out that my solution to this is to have more regulation. We have those regulations in some of the healthcare industry, for instance, has these kinds of regulations about how the things that it can do, they can build. It takes more time, right? Let's imagine for a moment a world where to be able to connect your company to the internet, like to provide your web service, you would have to go through some kind of regulatory approval, maybe on a regular basis, like having a license. I'm not saying I want that, but I'm saying it's a possibility. And then people, like actual humans, would review how you're doing and how are you changing the fabric of society, or are you really providing a good service? Are you regulating these bad people that might be on your service? And that would be an ongoing thing. So that's another possibility that would allow us to move forward.
Thank you. But I would agree with you if it is a worldwide thing. So if the regulation is just coming from one end and another one regulations, and their regulations, we have, in Europe, total different regulations as you have in the United States, and we believe in global warming and others don't. And so what regulations means is worth it if just one does it. So if it's the world being together in the United Nations or some sort of body, then yes, I definitely agree for those type of regulations.
So next question related to this. While AI is a technique for making computers smarter at doing a very specific task, that's what we have today, there's also the idea of making computers that can be more general in their intelligence, and the term is artificial general intelligence, not artificial intelligence, but artificial general intelligence. This is a computer that can think like a person. Do you see this becoming a real thing?
Well, I recently saw something that described AI as just a bunch of deeply nested if-then-else statements. But that's a joke. But I think with the way technology is going and the speed with which things are developing, I think we're going to see. I think we are already seeing robots and artificial intelligence merging together, and it's going to get hard to tell and define what a human is versus whatever you want to call those other things.
Yeah, absolutely, I agree with you. It's if you have video games and you look at the video games, how the graphics are enormous. Sometimes you really think, hey, this is a person. And if you look at Hollywood, you don't sometimes see what is fake and what is real. Yes, of course. There's no doubt about it, and voice is a little easier than pictures, and you definitely will see that happen, and it's hard to make a difference sometimes.
At some point, AI was always 20 years away. You might remember that thinking of that, but it's really here. It's just maybe not in the form that we thought. But if you read any kind of science fiction or see any movies that are about science fiction, there's always about the emergence of the singularity, where the AI itself becomes essentially conscious. So it becomes self-aware in a sense, and then it will probably think a lot faster than we do. So that's a common science fiction theme, and science fiction has a way of turning into reality, I find. So that's a bit worrying. So that's why we have to keep be mindful of these this increasingly interconnected world that we live in.
Yeah, what my experience has been that we're getting better and better at the technology being less discernible as, like for example, just take Siri, for example, or Google Assistant. At first it was just so obvious, and now, like with Google Assistant, it has the notion of context. So you can ask a question, and then you can ask a follow-up question, and in some cases it can answer. But even in those cases, it doesn't take very long before you remember you're reminded that you're talking to a machine that's really not thinking. And I've been reading a lot about neuroscience, and in neuroscience, most neuroscientists would say we don't even really understand consciousness. And for me, it makes me think that artificial intelligence is going to continue to get better and better and better. I'm not convinced that we're ever going to see artificial general intelligence. A computer that can truly think like a person to the degree that you can't tell the difference at all. You can talk to it about anything. It can do anything that's a mental task that a human could do. I don't know if we're ever going to get there. I'm not convinced.
Well, you mentioned that your daughter had the access to the whole world of human information, so it's probably happening sooner than you think, that kind of thing.
We'll see. That'll be interesting. Okay.
The thing you forgot to mention is you have access to all of the world's information. You also have access to all of the world's misinformation. So.
And if we get to that point where we have artificial general intelligence, what does that mean for software development?
It's hard to say, but to follow up with what you were just saying, I think if artificial intelligence does get close enough,
You got to get close to your mic.
To follow up with what Geoff was saying, I think if artificial intelligence is able to get close enough that we can't distinguish it, something artificial from something that's human, what difference does it really make? I mean, it does make a difference, at some level, but I don't know how we'll know that we've reached that point.
You already have chatbots that when you ask them, "Are you a chatbot?" they say, "No, I'm not a chatbot," and but of course they are.
How do you know that you're not?
Exactly.
Like,
I will
Maybe
quote
we're
from
already
this
there.
documentary called The Matrix.
Well, I said earlier on, I definitely believe artificial intelligence is going to be a big part in programming. As I said, everybody wishes to have a programmer who programs himself, and AI will definitely going to help us. And especially if voice recognition is that perfect, and the algorithm of the objects you are trying to address will give you a certain perfect feedback, yes, definitely artificial intelligence will be a great part of software development.
Okay, so I've got a few more questions, and we're reaching the end of our time, so I want to get through these quickly.
Wait, the end of times?
Is that?
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, sorry. Okay, so traditional programming languages like C and Pascal were king until object-oriented programming came along. Do you think object-oriented programming is here to stay for the foreseeable future, or is there some other programming paradigm on the horizon?
It's object-oriented programming is already passé. It's all about protocols and microservices and things like that. So if you conform to the protocol, you can talk to that certain microservice, for instance, or something. It's protocol-oriented programming. It's already there. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's just like the same answer I gave you with the platforms. I think, we see different methodologies for programming come along, and, it's always the latest and greatest that's finally going to kill object-oriented programming, but it doesn't. I mean, in that the talk earlier today, COBOL was mentioned, and that's still being widely used. How long what's that been, 30 years or something, or longer that it's been around?
Yeah, that's amazing. Oh, it's much longer than 30 years.
It's a long time, so I don't think object-oriented programming is going away.
So this is about the cloud. On Microsoft's recent earnings call, it seemed that Azure, their public cloud, was the star of the show. How do you use cloud computing in your solutions?
So I use it a lot. I mean, all of my web applications are up in AWS's cloud, and that's a weird phrase or term to use, but you guys all know what I mean. I'm using that for all the hosting, all my databases. Yeah, I don't think I could live without it now.
So for Lightspeed, OnSite is a on-premises solution. So it's about having your server and your clients on the same network, so it doesn't use cloud, but we do have an e-commerce solution, so if you want to sell online, you can. So we built a little bit of middleware that's all just the little functions and workers that can just expand as needed and contract as needed to be able to connect to the e-commerce solution, which is handled by a completely different team. So of course they rely entirely on the cloud, and until we built that little piece of connection, we didn't. But with that little piece and it being created as again something that can scale up and spin down as necessary, you can do it in a very, very cost-effective way. In fact, the biggest cost to all of this is storing the images that people will want to upload to their e-com and back, because that data, you want to have it cached so that when your server is offline or disconnected from the internet, your e-com store still works, right? So.
Well, that's right now we just use it for backup purposes, but basically everything that you're saying with Lightspeed is kind of the same technique that we're trying to implement with Everweb, but having images and all these large files, if they're not cached properly, you have that lag and you have these issues. But being able to have your data anywhere, I think, is very important. And I've seen more customers wanting to access their data usually from computers or tablets, but from anywhere, and slowly and with a lot of being very careful and also fear of making sure that there's no data loss or overwriting during syncing.
Syncing is hard, yes.
Syncing it scares me, so trying to avoid that, but
you have the correct attitude.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got time for one last topic here. There was a time when the transmission of information was very time-consuming and expensive, and I mean hundreds of years ago. Then the printing press came along, right, and changed the world. Nearly everyone now can read and write. With the world becoming increasingly digital, will programming become an increasingly common skill?
Basically, yes, because we all think. And the moment we start thinking, we already think of something. And whatever what we think that something is already a program. And to put that in lines of codes will be not possible, at least the way I see it. But yes, we program every day, and for all of the different subjects there is. But yes, programming will be in the sense of us developers helping other people program, like being a psychiatrist or something like that, helping other people to be aware of that, what they may be off or right. Yes, I think this is a modern way of thinking and programming of our own brains, and that eventually storing that thought in an external thing, like we said here, cloud, is a little far away, but is not an illusion. You know, we can measure with sensors and all sorts of stuff our waves of our thinking, and we're already there in putting in some perspective, analyzing that what we are thinking, and even putting it in some storage. If that storage will be available, that we can reboot our brain in the sense of like a microcontroller or an operating system, okay, that's maybe too far away. But yes, our thoughts will be able to be stored and to be recalled one way or another.
Yeah, I saw an article in, I think, the Scientific American recently, where they had these scientists have created, it's pretty primitive, but you can think, and the software can basically transpose your thoughts, the words you're thinking, into text.
Actually, we have in our laboratory already some so simple example. I have to say simple, where we put some sensors in our, on that. I have I hear bad, and I have microcontrollers already in my ear. To be quite frank, you can think of something and you can control something.
Oh yeah.
Turn it left or right. I mean, it's very primitive, I must admit, but it's there. It's already there.
When you think of programming in general, like you program your thermostat, you program your VCR, you make your phone do the sequence of things that it wasn't doing when it's stock. That programming, of course, everybody's doing that. It's going to be learning that, and it's going to be part of our lives, right? But programming in the sense of opening an editor and fixing code or writing custom software for someone that we do with Xojo or whatever the tools, I don't think that's going to democratize itself as much as you might think, because although we have a lot of learn to code programs out there, just go with for example the car. We started in the 20th century, not that many cars, and pretty much everybody was a mechanic. You had to because you had no network. Today we have a gazillion number of cars, but we're not all mechanics. Right, so most people.
Fewer of us are mechanics
exactly.
actually now.
that's the point, right? So same with programming in terms of what we think of as programming. That we do. I think that's still going to be a relatively niche or it's a different. It's an occupation. It's not just part of your daily life, right?
So you heard it here first. Your jobs are all safe.
That's what I'm thinking.
Okay. Anyone else have anything?
I mean, I think we've had conversations in the past about this whole citizen developer movement that's going on, where you're empowering business people to essentially, build solutions, software solutions. So I think we're already starting to see more people develop. It's just when we think of development, I think people in this room, we do think of opening up an IDE and actually coding something. They're doing it visually.
Right.
I don't think that diminishes the need for what we do. I think it's actually one of the things we could do is sort of foster that a little bit, help those people to understand how to use the tools they have and augment them.
What I want to add to that is, as a follow-up, is what we need to do there's still going to be relatively the same proportion of people who program in the population. Like there's the same proportion of mechanics or something like that, or people that build houses, and those are all skills, right? But what we need to do is we need to make sure that the people that are replacing us are a much more diverse group of people, so that the software that they write is much more relevant and doesn't suffer from some of the biases that the early software would have, because it needs to reflect the community it's coming from, and we need to make sure that our community has that kind of diversity that we hope and wish for, and we need to take active role in doing that. And
well, I will say that if you look back at the early days of technology, when my dad was an engineer, and he told me that he would literally have a machine with 8 switches and an input button. So he was literally flipping bits, right, mechanically or physically. At that time, the diversity in technology development was practically zero. Almost everybody in technology development was a middle-aged white male, basically, and only from a handful of countries. And today, okay. Anyway, but honestly, if you look at technology development today, it's become far more diversified, and I hope to see that continue. And things like the internet help that to happen, because we can collaborate very easily. And I wanted to go back to Bob, your question from the beginning about the good and bad of technology, and say that. I actually think that on a big scale, things like the internet and broadband and all that are making conflict or war increasingly obsolete, because you don't want to. We all now start to have friends in other countries, so we start caring about what's going on outside of our own tiny little part of the world, and the result is we don't want bad things to happen, in some other country, because we know people there. So that's, there are downsides to globalization, but there are a lot of upsides too. And I think the result of that is going to be that we, in the long run, have a more peaceful planet. So I'd like to thank the panel. We got the Ask the Engineers session coming up. So give these guys a big round of applause.
Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to add one more thing. So I have my demonstration on Friday at 11 o'clock, introducing you microcontrollers and Xojo, because I believe Xojo and tip control are the dream team. You plug and play, and off you go. So it's on Friday at 11 o'clock, and I'm happy to see you all there.
Great, thank you.